Hello and welcome once again to another plus-sized kite review. In today's video, I'm on the new Ozone Vortex Ultra X, the first jump into the Alula arena for Ozone, and boy did they come out the gates firing. Now, first things first, this demo kite was supplied to me by those fine gents over at Mac Kiteboarding. So a huge thanks to them, and if you want to give this kite a blast for yourself, I've left a link to it in the description below. Now, because we've been desperate for wind for the last month or so here in Auckland, I was only able to ride it over a couple of sessions in around 22 to 30 knots, on the 9 meter as always. So unfortunately I didn't really get a great feel for it at the very top end performance, but as soon as I get a chance to, I'll put out some posts about it on my Instagram, and then I'll also likely be including it in my 2024 wrap-up, where I compare the best kites of the year in another video, breaking down the best loops, the best boosts, by testing all of my favorite kites at the same time at the same location. But from the sessions I did have, however, in that mid to strong range of wind, this kite is bloody marvelous. From when you first pump up the kite and flip it over, and then watch it slide away in the lightest fart of wind while you try to grab your board to hold it down, you realize this thing is going to be a fairly light ride. I felt while moving around on the water, doing jumps, sending some loops, and even doing tricks I don't have the confidence to try on other kites, that I get to test over a limited time period, that this kite was just so easy to use, smooth, and incredibly friendly. Having of course flown my D-Labs in a lot of various sizes, the light bar pressure, responsiveness, and the ease of which you can maneuver it were not new to me, so I would imagine anyone coming from other Ozone kites or other heavier Dacron kites in general is likely to be blown away by that. The kite flies very quickly as you'd expect, and shoots forward in the window with gusto, as you would expect from any reduced leading edge of an Alula kite. But more so than some I'd imagine, so you can certainly motor along on it when powered. I did find this didn't quite translate to as much low end as I would get from my Evos, but I still had no trouble riding the 9 meter when the wind was dropping down into the lower 20s, even with some downwind current that we get often at the spot I was at, which can make a lot of kites challenging on the low end. So not bad, fairly good overall with the low end. Now, it was when the wind jumped up over 25 knots, that's certainly where this kite was shining the brightest. Starting with boosting, the kite did have very good lift, as you would expect, although I wouldn't put it quite on par with the Evo there either. And I have heard from more seasoned Ozone riders that it is just a step behind the edges for lift and boosting potential, if you are in tune with those kites. That said, having flown the edge, I would wager that most people will get on average more height from this kite because of how much more user-friendly it is, and how much easier it is to get a vertical lift on your jumps, a result of that thinner leading edge. One of the key things I find personally with boosting is that when the winds get really strong, if I am on a kite that doesn't feel as confident to ride for me, something that might be heavier on the bar or that feels unstable in the gusts, I do struggle to consistently go for the super aggressive sends while riding at that max speed that you need to really top out your height potential. And at least in this wind range, this kite never ever got even remotely intimidating for me. The comfort and control of it also translated nicely into having the confidence to try more tricks, of course. When looping, it was smooth as butter, always coming around and making its way back up quickly. You have the ability to easily loop it high and tight with an aggressive pull, making the loop and loop-related trick progression nice and easy. It was a bit challenging to slow down the pull or sheet out a little through the bigger loops to get the kite lower, but I also didn't have the big winds or height on most of the jumps I needed in these sessions to really go for big, lower powerful loops. So I do wonder a little bit how it will fare there. Whether we'll have more pull, whether it will be as easy, just don't know for sure. It did start to feel heavier and somewhat less responsive as the gusts started to hit over that 30 knot mark, but only if you are comparing it to other top-end Bigairkites like the D-Lab, and perhaps some of the recently tested kites like the Orbit Pro or Harlem Force. Of all those kites, although the performance was probably the closest thing yet to matching the Evo D-Lab, overall, the feeling of riding this Vortex actually reminded me the most of the Nitro V2, not so much specifically for how it performed, but for the level of confidence I felt riding it while just looping and doing tricks. The Kite is more swept back on the wingtips and more bow-shaped, so you'd think it wouldn't move so fast around the loops like those other kites, but that's where the Alula, of course, and the very well-tuned 8-point bridle come into play. I think I might have done more loops both ways, with more loop trick variations in these two sessions on this kite than any sessions I've had in a long time. And each time I rode for over 3 hours without a desire to swap around and try some other kites, or feel tired actually. I would potentially contribute a bit of that session longevity to the North Bar that I talked about in my last review, because of the comfy grip and the lighter weight, also making it nice and easy to use in the hand, even in colder winds. But of course, mainly it was just the ease of the kite, particularly with the lighter bar pressure. Like the D-Lab, it doesn't require a ton of work to move it around, and it's lightning fast. I think I could make an argument that because it doesn't quite have the same level of power, sending you so aggressively off the water as the D-Lab, that you might save a little energy using it over a long period of time. If I was strictly comparing these kites back to back, I would still have to give the overall performance edge to the Evo, so I could see why a top-level pro might prefer that kite to this one. But for a mid-tier rider like myself, I'm really wondering if I might prefer this as a 5 to 10% toned down version than that kite. Although, full disclosure, I don't own a 9-meter Evo D-Lab, and I've only ridden that size 4 to 5 times. And in those circumstances, it was about 5 to 10 knots more wind, so in my head, the memory of it is just more powerful and a more aggressive ride. But I would wager in the same conditions. For the lower and higher end, I would prefer the D-Lab, but in this nice sweet spot of 25 to 30 knots, there's a chance I would prefer the Vortex. Even though I might not be jumping as high, it's still got more power than most kites, and just that confidence boost to bang out all kinds of tricks I can do is just something really rewarding. I should also add, when it comes to hang time, although quite good, probably better than the Orbits and the Nitros, certainly than the Harlem, but again a shade off the Evo, as I wasn't consistently controlling myself long enough to get the board back on comfortably at similar heights to what I would be able to get away with on the 9-meter Evo D-Lab. I would certainly say for most riders looking to improve their looping game and get into more kite loop variations, this kite feels like even a step above the Orbits or Nitros. But that is what you'd hope paying for a top dollar Alula. If you've watched those videos, you would know how I also feel like those kites are just enough more forgiving and a bit easier for progression than my Evo D-Labs. But with all of these kites, we're talking about the best of the best on the market, that I am aware of, at least for big air and kite loop progression. I wish I could say that I knew how it behaved as well as those other kites in the 30 to 35 knots or more range, but I'm just not sure how long before I will get a chance to try it there. I know as soon as we do have a day like that, I will be getting back out on the Nitro V2 and this Vortex and giving them a back-to-back ride, because these might be my two current favorite 9-meter sized progression kites. Although I of course have a suspicion the Nitro is just going to suddenly feel a lot heavier and more sluggish in comparison to the Alula Vortex. But I am really interested as well how much more yank the shape of this Ozone kite adds when you're in the max conditions. Because I know from my time with XRs and even my D-Lab that it can get quite gnarly how much forward pull you get with these more bow-shaped kites. And if it is similar to that, then I probably wouldn't rate it quite as high as the Nitro Orbit for the progression to Megaloops, as the yank will be quite challenging getting used to, albeit a super rewarding one, of course. In summary, I really enjoyed riding the Vortex, and I don't really want to give it back anytime soon, so I want to spend a little bit more time on it, and I highly recommend anyone else giving it a go if they have a chance. Aside from perhaps not being the absolute best booster on the market, it's definitely one of the best overall kites for everything else in the big air arena, from the mid to advanced level rider like myself. And who knows, perhaps I will find with a bit more time on the kite, when I do get the absolutely nuking days, I find I can give my D-Labs a bit of a run for their money in that top end as well. So once again, a big thanks to Matt Kiteboarding for helping me get this review in the bag, and be sure to follow my Instagram for those final shots on the Vortex when we do get that absolute belter of a day. And given how bloody brilliant this kite is, be sure to stay tuned to hear it again in the Best of 24 comparison later this year. And finally, here's the point of the video where I would ask you to like, comment, and subscribe, but I have one small additional request. If you have been influenced into buying any kites from my videos in the past, I'd love it if you could just add a comment below. It really helps me influence brands to give me some kites to try, and that just means more videos. So thanks again for making it this far. As always, follow my Instagram as well for more up-to-date content, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.